Hey, before I get started, just want to let you guys know about my comic Dark Phantom. Issues 1 through 10 are available now for free on Webtoon. We've worked really hard on it and it would mean a lot to me if you would check it out. Thanks, and let's get on with the video. Hey, so I watched the Snyder Cut recently. Well, I say recently, but you're lucky that this video is coming out the same year the Snyder Cut did. But watching it now and looking back at the tumultuous road we went on to get here, I thought it would be fun to look back at the DC Cinematic Universe experiment and see how each movie flows together when watched back to back. That's it. Do you need anything more? That's the whole premise of the video. We can start now. Okay, so I haven't watched any of these movies since the theater, so it's been a while since I've seen this one. And honestly, it's better than I remember. It's not good, but it's better than I remember. Maybe that's just because I know how bad things become in the future, but I'm able to appreciate more of what this movie does well watching it today. I was surprised by how much I liked Lois Lane. Sure, a lot of her dialogue is very clunky.
I'm a Pulitzer Prize winning reporter. What if I need to tinkle?
But again, now that I know how these movies end up, it's nice to see her have an actual personality and be proactive in the plot. Also, Michael Shannon is a great General Zod. His performance might be my favorite part of this movie. There's even some stuff that people frequently point out as bad aspects of the movie that I honestly kinda liked this time around. There's that infamous scene of John Kent telling Clark that maybe he should have let that bus full of kids die, but in context it seems pretty obvious that this was just a moment of weakness for him. I really like this idea that the Kents are terrified of what people will think of Clark, since they don't even fully understand him themselves. Although, yeah, his death is still very bad and stupid. The reason he dies has been criticized to hell and back, and rightfully so, but I'm more hung up on the cause of death. Like, did it have to be a tornado? It's so over the top that it takes away from what's supposed to be a poignant and dramatic scene. All I can think about is Jonathan Kent getting whipped around in there like an out-of-control merry-go-round. That speaks to a larger problem of Zack Snyder prioritizing spectacle over everything else, and believe me, that's not the last time I'm going to be saying that in this video. That problem is especially apparent during that infamous climactic battle between Superman and Zod. I will say it's nice to see Superman prioritizing some people, but that really gets overshadowed by him doing 50 consecutive 9/11s on Metropolis. I mean, like, even in the scene right before it happens, Jor-El's like,
"You can save her, Cal. You can save all of them."
oh, he can he? Here's another small positive I have. Even though Snyder is really trying to hammer in this obsession with Superman being Jesus, he at least feels the most like a person in this than he does in any of the future movies. I like that he willingly allows himself to be taken custody by the government so he can build a sense of trust with them. That's a very Superman move. And then there's, of course, the scene where he kills Zod. Now, this is a very dumb scene since there were clearly many ways Superman could have fixed this situation without killing him, but I didn't mind it as much as I did the first time I watched this movie. I think that's partly because, at least here, Superman feels bad about murdering someone. But more on that later. As for other things I noticed, the pacing in this movie is remarkably bad. I get what they were going for with the out-of-order storytelling, but it just comes off really clunky. Clark puts on the Superman costume for the first time like an hour into the movie, and it just sort of happens. No real build-up, it doesn't feel like anything's getting paid off, he's just wearing the Superman costume now. Cool? All in all, this is not a very good movie, but I'm surprised by how much I ended up liking it in the end. And I'm sorry to say, it mostly goes downhill from here. The only version of this movie on HBO Max was the Ultimate Edition, so that's the one I watched for this video. The 3-hour Ultimate Edition. Jesus Christ, you know sometimes less is more, Zach. I remember when I first saw this movie in theaters, I initially loved it. I was taken in by the spectacle of seeing my two favorite superheroes side by side for the first time on the big screen. For a brief moment, I was able to put myself in the mind of a Snyder cultist. But I have an ability they don't have. Critical thinking. It didn't take long for my opinion on this movie to diminish greatly, and watching it now, it's even worse than I remember. That opening scene of Bruce Wayne during the destruction of Metropolis is technically good. I like the concept of reframing something we previously saw as heroic and making it seem horrific. Only problem is that scene never seemed heroic. Even in Man of Steel, it just looked like Superman mercilessly leveling a densely populated city. This only serves to make Superman seem even more inhuman and evil. Like, yeah, Batman, this guy's no good, you should kill him. There's this whole debate throughout the entire movie of if Superman should be regulated or not that's sparked by Lex Luthor framing him for murdering a bunch of people in the Middle East, but like, why did he need to frame him for anything? Did the entire world except Batman just forget the time he slaughtered countless civilians? Snyder keeps doubling down on his idea that Superman is like Jesus, but I don't believe for a second that anyone in this world would see him that way after what happened in Metropolis. Speaking of the frame job, can we talk about how stupid Lex Luthor is in this movie? Even setting aside the fact that they made him more like Mark Zuckerberg than Lex Luthor, although that bothers me very much, he's just insufferable. He's certainly going for a crazy, unhinged kind of performance, but it just comes across as really annoying. Why'd he piss in the jar? Why'd he piss in the jar? What does the jar of piss symbolize, Zach? As for other performances, I really like Jeremy Irons as Alfred. He's probably my favorite part of this entire movie. On the other hand, and I know this might be a bit controversial, but I never really gelled with Ben Affleck's Batman. He always seemed too normal. I mean, in the reality of Zack Snyder where everyone is moody, melodramatic, and constantly making grand, poetic speeches, Bruce Wayne just doesn't seem like the weirdo he should be. He doesn't really have Batman angst, he mainly just has average, alcoholic, middle-aged man angst. At least the costume is good. This is probably the best live-action Batman costume I've ever seen. And yeah, okay, let's get into it. I hate Batman killing people in this movie. I hate it when Superman does it too, but if the movie's able to pretend he's not actually killing anyone, then so am I. Hold on, did Superman just save a villain's life? Careful, Zach, you're coming dangerously close to having the slightest understanding of Superman's character. You could argue that Batman is in a darker state in this movie, but even at the end when he's supposedly getting better, he's still acting more like the Punisher than like Batman. Speaking of the ending, the Martha scene is objectively the funniest thing ever put to film.
Why did you say that now?
The ending fight with Doomsday is also completely gratuitous, and I cannot stress enough how useless Batman is in it. Why is Lois the one going to get the kryptonite spear? Batman even says he lured Doomsday to this location specifically so he could use the spear. Why isn't he trying to actually get to the spear? I know this is all part of Zack Snyder's obsession with paralleling Superman with Jesus, killing him off just to resurrect him later, but come on, man, this is way too early to be doing it. Wait one more movie at least. There's so much to say about this movie, but I need to wrap this section up eventually. I'm not Zack Snyder, I actually value your time. Zack has a bad habit of doing in 10 minutes what could be accomplished in 1, and this isn't even the worst example of that, but we'll get to that later. Remember the pacing problem from Man of Steel? It's even worse here. Batman and Superman don't even meet until over an hour in, and it just kind of happens out of nowhere. Most of the runtime before that moment is just Bruce Wayne and Clark Kent having identical conversations with randos to reinforce how much they both hate each other. It was the longest 3 hours of my life. Fortunately, the next movie is the length of a normal movie. Unfortunately, the next movie is also... Here we go, the first DCEU movie not directed by Zack Snyder. This was the make or break point, the proving ground for the entire concept of a DC cinematic universe. How do you think it went? I already kind of made a video talking about Suicide Squad, so I'll keep this relatively brief. Right from the get-go, it's clear this movie is just Warner Bros.' attempt to make their own Guardians of the Galaxy. Guardians has an 80s music soundtrack, so we'll use a not 80s music soundtrack. I don't know, I don't listen to music, guys. But even a guy like me was able to see how distracting the soundtrack is. The opening sequence is just song after song with barely a break or transition between them. It's not just the music either, the entire style of this movie is just so obnoxious and overbearing. The infamous neon title cards for each character are a perfect example.
And have you heard of the pyrokinetic homeboy?
He could play around in the Himalayas for hours and he would be perfectly fine. Well, I say each character, but it's strange that Slipknot, the man who can climb anything, didn't get one. That's so weird that they did that. I have no idea why. Even though this is an ensemble team movie, most of the squad members are really only there to fulfill one task during their mission and otherwise have nothing to do or say for the rest of the plot. Katana is probably the worst example of this. She barely has any lines, doesn't do anything particularly noteworthy, and her only characterization is the stuff Rick Flag clumsily exposits for no reason. Oh, speaking of useless characters, remember how I said the Martha scene in BVS is the funniest thing ever put to film? I lied, it's actually Jared Leto's Joker. Just every frame he's on screen, that's the funniest thing ever put to film. I know this joke has been made to death, but I mean, come on, man, what were they thinking with those tattoos? Come to think of it, a lot of characters in this movie have really distracting writing all over them. I will say, probably the only good thing in this movie is Viola Davis. She's perfectly cast as Amanda Waller. But that really doesn't matter much when the movie she's in is so bad. Margot Robbie is also fine as Harley Quinn. I don't know, I really don't like Harley as a character in pretty much any context outside of Batman the Animated Series. It kind of just feels like they cast Margot Robbie because they saw her in Wolf of Wall Street and said, she's blonde and can do the accent, close enough. She's not bad, her performance is actually probably one of the better parts of the movie, but she's also given some of the most painfully unfunny lines.
Huh? What was that? I should kill everyone and escape?
Shut up! Shut up! Skylar. Shut up!
Sorry.
Shut up! Shut up!
The voices.
Shut up! Shut up!
I'm kidding. Jeez. That's not what they really said.
And then Will Smith as Deadshot he's Will Smith. Let's see, I'm happy they acknowledged Captain Boomerang is a Flash villain. Is that a positive point I can give this movie? Suicide Squad is just such a disposable movie. As of writing this, I only watched it a few hours ago, and I'm already struggling to recall anything of note about it. And with James Gunn's The Suicide Squad coming out soon, this movie's gonna be even more pointless than it already is. Okay, that's it. These movies just keep getting worse and worse. If the next one isn't any better, then I'm just quitting this entire project right here and now. Yeah, okay, this one's pretty good. A great and very underappreciated thing about this movie is how well it fits into the rest of the universe that's been created up to this point. It meshes well with Diana's story from Batman v Superman and sort of makes that movie a little bit better in hindsight as a result. Not very much better, but still a little tiny bit better. This movie could have so easily been bad. Wonder Woman has been in a pretty bad state for years since DC can't seem to choose what her character is. Depending on who's writing her, she's either a cold, ruthless killer warrior or a kind, optimistic hero. The kind of person who can make a hawk a dove, stop a war with love, make a liar tell the truth. Sorry. Anyway, I'm happy they leaned more into the latter characterization. After so many movies full of grim darkness where all the characters are angsting about grand yet empty ideas of gods and devils, it's nice to see a movie that forgoes all that. There are so many little character moments that just endear us to our protagonists even more. Ironically, in a series obsessed with the idea of superheroes being gods amongst men, it's the superhero who's actually a god that feels the most grounded and human. I will say Gal Gadot is not a great actor. Sometimes she has a little trouble emoting properly, but she does a good job with what's required of her here for the most part. Chris Pine as Steve Trevor is also great, and I really love Dr. Poison. What a deep cut pick for the villain of the movie, and she's so cartoonishly evil, it's great. I like the ragtag team of fighters that join our heroes too, although I definitely see the resemblance when people say they're kind of a ripoff of the Howling Commandos from the first Captain America movie. It doesn't help that both movies end with a guy named Steve sacrificing himself in an airplane. And speaking of that ending, yeah, it's not great, and it's clear it was just a studio mandate to have a big CGI battle at the end. Patty Jenkins has basically said as much in interviews. I mean, they do make it work as best they can, but it just doesn't fit at all with what came before it. The rest of the movie feels like it's taking inspiration from the 1940s Marston comics and the George Perez post-crisis run, but at the very end it takes a hard shift to being more like the New 52 Wonder Woman. In non-comic reader speak, that means it went from adventurous and optimistic to grim and edgy. Not to mention, Ares being in this movie in any context kind of ruins the entire thesis. At first I thought maybe they could have fixed it by doing what they did in the George Perez comics and have Wonder Woman convince Ares to stop with facts and logic rather than just blowing him up. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that that wouldn't have worked either. Listen closely, because this is the one and only time I'm ever gonna say this. This movie would have been better if it had been less like the comics. What the movie was going for and what the studio forced them to include at the end are just too at odds with each other. It hardly destroys the movie though. Like I said, they handle the ending as best they can, and the rest of the movie is still enjoyable. It was certainly a breath of fresh air after everything that came before it. After this movie came out, I remember a lot of us, myself included, were optimistic about the future of the DCEU. They had stumbled at the gate, but maybe they could get things back on track. And then the next movie came out. I'll be honest, I'm not really sure how to approach this movie. I mean, it's next to impossible to look at it in a vacuum now that the Snyder Cut is out. I think I'll look at that one as the real Justice League movie, so in this section I'll just look at all the things that this movie does differently. Like I said earlier, I haven't seen any of these movies since the theater, and watching Justice League again now that I've seen how Zack Snyder wanted it to be, I both dislike and like this version more than I used to. At least this version is the length of a normal movie. Zack Snyder is a director who needs some sort of supervision. If you let him run wild, you're gonna end up with a movie that takes up way more time than it needs to. Take Batman v Superman, for example. After watching the Ultimate Edition, I gained a newfound appreciation for just how much unneeded fat got cut off the movie for the theatrical cut. But for Justice League, again, especially after seeing the Snyder Cut, it's painfully obvious what a botched editing job this ended up being. Scenes continually end and begin way too abruptly. Like, I get that they wanted to cut down on Snyder's habit of holding on things for way too long, but at least give us some time to breathe. A lot of the characters end up getting butchered too, mainly Batman, Cyborg, and Steppenwolf. Like seriously, I forgot just how ugly the CGI on Cyborg and Steppenwolf was in this movie. And with Cyborg, I still like what we got from him here. I honestly kind of like his introduction scene here more than the one in the Snyder Cut, but it's really just a shame how much of his scenes got cut from this movie. But seriously, I don't think any character gets it worse than Batman. It's painfully obvious which of his lines were written by which creative team. He varies wildly, going from the brooding vigilante we know from the last movie to an awkward, stammering dunce, usually within the same scene. And yeah, all the characters are telling quippy Joss Whedon jokes in this movie, and not a single one of them is remotely funny.
I mean, do you talk to fish? The water.
All that being said, despite the fact that this is a jumbled mess of a film where you can pretty much see the behind-the-scenes drama bleeding through onto every single frame, I gotta be honest. Not every change is a bad one. I like that the soundtrack uses the John Williams Superman theme and the Danny Elfman Batman theme. I like that there's some actual color. I like that it's shorter. And most importantly, I like what they did with Superman. In both versions of Justice League, they make a big deal about how they absolutely need to bring Superman back to life. And in both versions, it very much feels like it undercuts the message that these heroes are stronger together. I mean, what's the point of teaming up if you just need Superman to fly in and beat up the bad guy for you? But there's a key difference between the two. In the Snyder Cut, it feels like they just need Superman because he's the best at punching. But here it feels like they need him because he's the most human. He doesn't just emotionlessly kill Steppenwolf, he offers a helping hand to the Flash. He helps out and shares a laugh with Cyborg after a tense moment. It's great. True, this is pretty much a completely different character than what we saw in the first two movies. His dialogue is still painfully unfunny, and Henry Cavill delivers his lines like a robot, but man, you have no idea how good it felt to see an even halfway decent interpretation of my all-time favorite fictional character in these movies. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that makes Justice League good. It's still a jumbled, rushed, incomplete train wreck of a movie, but I think it's slightly more enjoyable than people give it credit for. Again, just to clarify, still bad, just need to make that clear. Don't want to make it sound like I'm defending, well, you know. Anyway, what's next? Before making this video, there were only 2 movies in this series that I hadn't seen, and Aquaman was one of them. It was just one of those things. None of my friends wanted to see it when it was out in theaters, and after Justice League, I really didn't care enough to see it by myself. And seeing it now, even though my expectations were pretty low, I actually ended up enjoying it a lot more than I thought I would. I think by this point they were starting to get shaky on the whole cinematic universe idea. I mean, they reference the events of Justice League, but there's also some weird continuity stuff. In Justice League, they show that the Atlanteans have to make air pockets in order to talk underwater, but here they can just talk. Also, Mira has an American accent here, but I'm pretty sure she was British in Justice League. I don't know, I don't feel like going back to check.
You dare speak of Queen Atlanta that way?
Aquaman is, without a doubt, the best looking movie in this entire series. I love when comic book movies totally embrace the more fantastical nature of the source material, and this one does that to a degree I rarely see, if ever. A lesser version of this movie would have thought of any excuse to keep our heroes out of the water as much as possible, but no, James Wan wanted to set this movie apart from the rest visually, and he absolutely pulls it off. It doesn't feel like a standard run-of-the-mill superhero movie, it feels like a grand-scale fantasy adventure. However, that can also work to its disadvantage. It kind of feels like they had 3 different ideas for the movie, and instead of just choosing one, they were like, yeah, let's do them all. Because of how much the movie's juggling, the plot often moves very fast and very abruptly. I remember back in high school, one of my teachers once told me, if you're writing a story and you don't know what should happen next, just write, and then Nazis kick down the door. Well, I think the writers of this movie heard that advice too. There's also a lot of expositional dialogue, and it really gets in the way of most of the character stuff. Jason Momoa and Amber Heard have a decent enough chemistry, but I just don't buy their romantic subplot. That might be for the best though. You probably want to stay away from her, Arthur. I heard her last relationship didn't go so well. So yeah, if you're looking for deep characters with complex emotional journeys, you're looking in the wrong place. But like, this movie's just cool, man. I'm sorry, I see Aquaman wearing a completely comic-accurate costume, riding into battle on an ocean kaiju while commanding an army of sharks and whales. I get happy. These are also probably my favorite villains in the entire series. Both Ocean Master and Black Manta are acting exactly like comic book villains. It's great. Although it kind of does the Black Panther thing where the hero only has 2 really iconic and recognizable villains and they just use both of them in the first movie even though they clearly want to have a franchise. Black Manta especially gets pretty shafted by this. I like every scene he's in, but the script is just juggling too many things to dedicate a significant amount of time or focus on him. Oh well, at least both the villains are alive at the end of this movie. He's fine. Oh, remember how I said Jared Leto's Joker was the funniest thing ever put to film? Well, he still is, but the original Pitbull song in this movie is pretty funny too. Ocean to ocean. Aquaman is not for everyone, and I certainly would have preferred a more focused story with some more fleshed out characters, but I can't say I didn't enjoy it. It's just a lot of over-the-top creative fun. Glad this video gave me a reason to finally watch it. Okay, by this point it seems like they had completely given up on the cinematic universe idea. Like, this definitely takes place in a DC universe, but something tells me a world in which Batman brands sex criminals so they get killed in prison is not the same world where Batman toys are sold in Target. Anyway, I absolutely love this movie. It takes the heart and strong characterization of Wonder Woman, the unabashed embracing of comic book weirdness of Aquaman, and combines them into a smaller scale personal story. Zachary Levi is perfectly cast as Captain Marvel. I refuse to call him Shazam, his name is Captain Marvel. I don't care if Marvel has their own Captain Marvel, this Captain Marvel was called Captain Marvel before Marvel was called Marvel. Everyone got that? Good. Anyway, yeah, Zachary Levi is great. I had absolutely no problem believing he was a kid, and even though we don't get a whole lot of time with Billy as Billy, the 2 performances flowed so well together that the transition from kid to superhero was seamless. I also love that a significant amount of time is spent figuring out how his powers work. It adds to the childlike fun and makes moments like Billy learning how to fly feel all the more impactful. I also like that he doesn't choose to use his powers heroically at first, instead using them selfishly and the decisions getting him into trouble. Superhero origin stories about the protagonist learning what it means to be a hero always have a special place in my heart. The rest of the cast is great too. The entire Foster family has such a friendly and believable dynamic. Freddy is of course my favorite of them. I mean, it only makes sense since he gets far and away the most focus, but I like that all of them at least get a short moment to shine. The weakest part of this movie is probably the villains, and like Wonder Woman, I feel like the filmmakers were being tied down by WB executives to keep things more like the New 52. Mark Strong is good as Dr. Sivana, he was plenty intimidating, and that scene in the boardroom will probably give kids nightmares for years to come, but he ultimately just kind of felt like a standard bad guy who has all the powers of the hero but is evil. I think I would have preferred the pre-New 52 crazy mad scientist take, you know, make him more of a super genius and have him present a problem that Captain Marvel can't just punch into submission. I also would have cast Anthony Carrigan, I feel like he was just born to play Sivana. I'm also not a big fan of the 7 Deadly Sins, I wish they had been given some more unique designs, but as it stands they all look pretty generic. That's my only real criticism against this movie though, and hell, I probably won't even have that same problem for the sequel if they actually go through with using Mr. Mind as the main villain. I just love the simplicity of this movie. After all the grand scale fantasy epics and the pseudo-philosophical talk of gods and devils and the apocalyptic events, it was nice to have a small scale story about family, childhood, and heroism. I have absolutely no problem declaring Shazam as my favorite movie in the DCEU. Okay, what's next? Really? Really? We're doing that? I mean, I already did a whole video about it, and it's not even part of this universe, is it? Next movie.
This is our story. And I'm telling it, so I'll start where I fucking want.
Birds of Prey, or Birds of Prey and the Fantabulous Emancipation of One Harley Quinn, or Birds of Prey Harley Quinn, or... I'll be honest, I almost forgot this movie existed when planning this video.
If you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all.
Okay, that's not entirely true. The action is pretty kinetic and fun. Ewan McGregor is clearly having a ball? This movie is just annoying to me, that's a good way to put it. It just irritates me. There's just a lot of stylistic choices I find distracting, like the animated intro, the random musical sequence that comes out of nowhere and feels like it was just included to have a cool shot for the trailer, or the fact that the entire first act of the movie is told out of order for no real reason. I mean, I guess I'd rather have a movie that tries to stand out and do new things, but it felt like it had less of a creative vision and was more just throwing things at the wall to see what stuck. I mentioned this when I talked about Suicide Squad, but I really don't like Harley Quinn as a character, and this movie does absolutely nothing to change my mind. I'm just not a fan of her whole deal. It kind of feels like there's two movies here and they're both constantly fighting for attention. The Harley Quinn movie and the Birds of Prey movie. Really, I wish they just picked a lane, stop shoehorning Harley Quinn into everything. Also, okay look, before I say anything, just know that what I'm about to talk about isn't necessarily a criticism of the movie so much as it is a personal preference thing, but to paraphrase Marcus from Cosmonaut Variety Hour, since I'm kinda stealing this video idea from him anyway, I can usually tell when someone making a comic book movie does or does not know the source material. Like with Wonder Woman and Aquaman, for example, I was able to accept the many deviations from the comics because it was just so clear to me that the people behind the scenes got it, you know? But here, I am just completely unable to turn off my "that's not how it's supposed to be" brain, and I wouldn't be surprised if the filmmakers didn't read any comics before making the movie. Most of the characters share absolutely nothing in common with their comic book counterparts besides the name, Huntress and Cassandra Cain being the worst examples. Why did they even bother calling this character Cassandra Cain if they weren't going to make her even remotely resemble Cassandra Cain? Cassandra's really cool in the comics, and it sucks that this is the only version of her that mainstream audiences are gonna know about. Also, I really hate the costume design in this movie. They couldn't even get the color scheme right on most of these characters. You're telling me this costume would have been so absurdly out of place for this version of Harley Quinn? Why did I say Harley Quinn? Why did I say that? It's clear. I'm talking about what I wrote Black Canary in the script. Why did I say Harley Quinn? Why do Zaz's scars barely look like tally marks? Why does Black Mask only wear his black mask for a few minutes? How come when the Birds of Prey finally do get their costumes, they look like...
Step back, I think I'm gonna vomit!
Again, these aren't really criticisms of the movie per se, but it just makes me wonder what's the point of making a comic book movie if you're not even gonna bother making it resemble the comics it's based on? Okay, one more thing, and I promise I won't harp on this point for very long, because I don't want to be that guy, but I kind of feel like this movie hates men. There's not a single good male character in the whole movie. Even the one guy we thought was nice ends up betraying Harley. I know it's a female empowerment movie, and I'm all for that, but I'm also not going to sit here and be one of those guys who's like, "Yes, queen, despite the fact that I myself am a man. Ugh, I too hate all men. We truly are the worst." Again, I'm not the quartering, so I'm going to drop that point here, just something I couldn't stop thinking about during the movie. So yeah, well, I didn't think there's a lot technically wrong with Birds of Prey. It just really rubbed me the wrong way and isn't what I go to a superhero movie to see. I know it has its fans. I know a certain bald Canadian who's probably going to have something to say about its placement on my list, but it's just not for me. No one does it better than the Birds of Prey. While I know plenty of movies that do it better than the Birds of Prey. Next movie. Other than Aquaman, this was the only movie that I hadn't seen before doing this video. When it came out, my friends and I had planned to go to one of those private watch parties at Cinemark, but those plans never materialized, and by the time I realized that, they had taken it off HBO Max. But unlike Aquaman, I was not pleasantly surprised by this one. I'll say this, I haven't seen a comic book movie with this level or type of unabashed cheesiness since the Raimi Spider-Man movies, but those were a lot more charming than this is. This has got to be one of the messiest scripts I've seen from a big budget studio movie. Just, where do I start? Characters just do things with no motivation. Things just happen for no reason. The movie makes up rules only to break those rules later on. It's a mess. I think this is the most blatant example of these movies ditching the cinematic universe concept. In Batman v Superman, Wonder Woman implies that she went into hiding after World War I, but here she's just a fully practicing superhero in the 80s. Also, she can fly in this movie, which would have been a very useful ability in BVS or Justice League, but I guess she just forgot how to do it in between movies. Speaking of which, this movie just keeps pulling new powers for Wonder Woman out of its ass with absolutely no setup or foreshadowing. At one point, she just reveals she has the ability to turn things invisible, and it comes right out of nowhere, and she never uses it again. It just happens. That's a good way to describe this movie. It just happens. Pedro Pascal is fun in this movie as the villain, Maxwell Lord. He's at least having a good time. But his plan makes absolutely no sense. His business is failing, so he wants to steal a magic wishing stone, but when he gets the stone, he doesn't wish for his business to succeed. He wishes to be merged with the stone, so now he has the power to grant people's wishes, and the first thing he does with that power is trick someone into wishing his business was successful. And then he just starts granting random people's wishes all over the place without any real end goal in mind. Speaking of the wishes, can we talk about the weird way they brought Steve Trevor back? So, Wonder Woman wishes on the stone for him to come back, but when he does, he's possessing the body of this random guy? Why didn't he just come back? It's not like the stone doesn't have the ability to manifest things out of thin air. We clearly see it making things appear later on. You could say it's part of the monkey's paw aspect of the stone, like each wish comes with a price, but they never really address the moral quandary of Steve taking over this guy's body in the movie. Plus, they pretty clearly say that Wonder Woman is losing her powers, and that's the price she's paying. Even though she's not losing her powers, she seems pretty powered up throughout the whole movie. Not only is this a weird creative choice, but it also leads to some uncomfortable implications. Like, Wonder Woman totally raped that guy.
I thought the rape scene went really well.
I am here.
I absolutely do not think they intended that implication to be there, but it's just hilarious that not once during the writing, rewriting, storyboarding, filming, and editing process of the movie did anybody take any objection to that aspect of the story. As for other things, Kristen Wiig is really miscast here. Like, she's a good actor and she does the best job with what she's given, I just don't think she's intimidating enough to play a villain. And her turn to Cheetah is just another example of things happening in this movie for no reason. Like, she had absolutely no reason to wish to become an apex predator. The action and CGI of this movie are also really wonky, but I can slightly forgive that since I imagine COVID got in the way of post-production. But that excuse doesn't extend to the absolutely abysmally put together script. I don't dislike everything about it. I think the reversal of the fish out of water stuff from the first movie is cute, with Diana now being the one who has to introduce Steve to this brand new world, but that's really the only positive I can give this movie. When the nicest thing I can say is I'm pretty sure they tried their best, that is a very bad sign. Okay, home stretch, just one more movie to go. 1 4-hour movie. Oh boy. And here it is, definitive proof that anything is possible if you cry on Twitter for long enough. Okay, jokes aside, even though I've been very vocal about how I don't like Zack Snyder's DC movies, I am happy that he's been allowed to see his original vision of Justice League through. Well, I say his original vision, but I highly doubt this is actually the movie we would have seen in theaters if nothing had gone wrong back in 2017. Like, it probably wouldn't have been in 4:3, and it probably wouldn't have gotten a black and white version. He clearly got the paycheck, realized that this was his opportunity to do whatever he wanted, and just went nuts with it. And you know what? Good for him. He's been through a lot, and I think he's earned a big self-indulgent 4-hour bonanza. But, I still don't like it. I see so many people praising this as the first good Zack Snyder DC movie, like he's finally hit his stride, and I'm just sitting here feeling like I'm taking crazy pills. Did we watch the same movie? I'm really not sure where to start with the Snyder Cut since it's so absurdly long and it's split into parts like a mini-series. The first hour or so is painfully boring. It's mostly just stuff from the theatrical cut, only longer, grayer, and without the garbage, unfunny humor. You know, it's the classic Snyder thing of holding on shots or scenes way too long even though nothing of any real importance is happening. Like, did we really need to hear these ladies sing a song for Aquaman after he dives into the ocean? I'd say it doesn't really get interesting until part 3, about an hour and a half in, when they start delving deeper into Cyborg and the Flash. I stand by what I said about liking Cyborg's introduction in the theatrical cut better, but it's nice to see him using his powers to actually help someone in need here. This is probably the most heroic moment in any of the Snyder DC movies, and it has nothing to do with punting a monster through a building. In fact, pretty much all the characters in this benefit from the new cut. Cyborg gets more focus, Aquaman is less of a dick, Wonder Woman feels more in line with the version of her we saw in her first movie, and even though I'm not a big fan of Ben Affleck's Batman, at least he felt more consistent here. Even Steppenwolf is a little better here. Obviously the CGI got a significant improvement, but I mean, his character has the slightest amount of motivation given to him, so that immediately makes him better than his theatrical cut counterpart. Although this version also severely overcomplicates his plan. Okay, so in the unnecessarily long flashback sequence, we see Darkseid's forces attacking Earth using the mother boxes. We also see Darkseid smashing the ground with his axe and making this symbol appear, which we later are led to believe symbolizes the anti-life equation, the big important thing that Darkseid and Steppenwolf are looking for. I can only assume this means they know that the anti-life equation is here on Earth. However, when they retreat and leave the mother boxes behind, they apparently forget what planet they were on? So then why did Steppenwolf know to come to Earth to find the mother boxes? And why is it apparently a big reveal when he discovers that the anti-life equation is on Earth? And why is he surprised to learn that Earth is the planet that fought them off all those years ago when they know that they left the mother boxes on the planet that fought them off and he's on Earth collecting the mother boxes? Reading this section back, I realize this sounds like the ramblings of a madman, and honestly I don't know if that's Zack Snyder or me. On the other hand, there are also some characters that I think got worse in this version. The Flash, for one, I mean, he's pretty annoying in both versions, but something about him here is just even more irritating to me. That introductory scene is just especially insufferable. And yeah, I'd like to talk about Superman now. Remember how I said that the version of Superman we saw in the 2017 Justice League was the closest thing to how Superman should be that we've ever gotten in one of these movies? Yeah, all that's gone now. He is now just an unfeeling sociopath who will brutally and wordlessly slaughter his enemies without a second thought. There's no heart, he doesn't feel like the most human member of the team anymore, he just feels like a weapon the League uses to beat Steppenwolf. And look, a lot of people ask me why I care so much about how Superman is portrayed in these movies. I mean, these are just adaptations, right? It's not like the comic book version is going anywhere. Well, one, that's not always true, just look at how Iron Man gets portrayed in the comics before and after Robert Downey Jr. And two, as a long-suffering Superman fan, I've read every possible criticism of the character made by people who've never actually read a single Superman comic. oh, Superman's too powerful. He has no personality. He's so boring. And when I see that version of Superman in this movie, and I know that this is what most mainstream audiences are gonna think the character is like, I just get sad. I don't know, I could make a whole video about the importance of adaptation, but I think for now I'll just leave that point there. We also have to talk about all the sequel bait crammed into the very end, like the oh no, Superman is evil because we are incapable of making an interesting story where he's the good guy future, which implies that the only thing keeping Superman good is Lois Lane, and the instant she dies— nope, I said I'm done with that point. I just think it's so funny how Zack teases all these sequels that will probably never happen, just giving us a taste of what his DC series would be like. And I gotta say, even though I don't have any desire to see these movies, it really is a fascinating insight into Zack's mind. Look, there's a lot that can be said about the Snyder Cut, way too much to talk about here, so if you're interested in hearing more of my thoughts on it, you can check out the discussion video I did with my friend good old Matt. But for now, I'll just summarize by saying, even though I did not like this movie, and I still fundamentally disagree with Zack's vision of the DC universe, I will at least concede that this movie is better than the theatrical cut, purely on the basis of it being a more complete and cohesive film. So that brings us to current day, and the DCEU is in a very different place than I imagined WB wanted it to be in when it first started. I gotta say, even though I ended up disliking most of the movies, I have gained a newfound appreciation for them. First of all, if Warner Bros. Wanted to have a cinematic universe to rival Marvel, which they clearly did, they probably should have found a better architect for it than Zack Snyder. His weird, unique vision was just too difficult for other directors to slot their movies into. But oddly enough, that's kind of worked to their advantage. Once they gave up on the idea of having a grand universe that's all building toward a climactic epic finale, that's freed up directors to add more of their own unique voices to their movies and make them stand out as a result. Hopefully the failure of 2017's Justice League and the good reception that the Snyder Cut has gotten will encourage Warner Bros. To step back and let their directors direct from now on. Also, I like how much they appear to be embracing the comics. I mean, Marvel feels like they've left their comics in the lurch, just using them as a basis for making movies and TV shows and not really appreciating them as their own thing. I mean, they didn't even bother reprinting Tom King's Vision run ahead of WandaVision's release. I'm still mad about that. But from what I can tell, DC seems to be doing things differently. It's nice to see the John Ostrander appreciation in James Gunn's Suicide Squad, and they've been hiring comic book writers like Grant Morrison, Tom King, and Ta-Nehisi Coates to write the Flash, New Gods, and Superman movies respectively. Okay, as I was working on this video, they announced the cancellation of the New Gods movie, so that kind of invalidates that point a little bit, but still. Going into this video, I really only saw the DCEU as the awkward step-sibling to the far more successful MCU. But coming at the other end, I have a newfound appreciation for these movies. I like that the filmmakers are allowed to add their own unique voices to their projects, and I like that they're embracing their comic book roots more than Marvel is. I may not like most of these movies, but I'm excited to see where they go next. Hey, thanks for watching. If you like this video, consider subscribing for more stuff. You could have seen this video 24 hours early for just $1 on Patreon, links in the description. Also, follow me at ClassActJack on Twitter for updates on future projects. And of course, check out my comic Dark Phantom. Links to everything are in the description. I'll see you guys later.